Memory is the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. It is an integral part of human cognition. Without it, one would not be able to remember important dates, plan ahead, or learn at all. Resultantly, it is important that researchers investigate memory and the processes involved in it. Storage, in relation to memory, refers to the retention of encoded information. This presentation will be focusing on the information processing model of memory. This theory postulates 3 stages of memory storage: sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. When information is processed through our senses, it enters its corresponding sensory register. If we pay attention to incoming information entering our sensory registers, then it will enter short-term memory. In order for our memories to pass from short-term memory to long-term memory, we have to verbally rehearse the information via maintenance rehearsal. With the more something is rehearsed, the longer lasting and better the memory becomes. Once our memories have been transferred to long-term memory, they have to be retrieved and transferred back to short-term memory in order to produce or recall the memory. Now, each of these memory stores have a unique duration and capacity. Today, I will be examining 3 pieces of research which, in some way, demonstrate the information processing model of memory. These include Glanzer and Kunitz, Sperling, and Scoville and Milner. In combination, these studies will illustrate how short-term memory and long-term memory are different stores, the limited duration of sensory memory, and that the brain has distinct memory stores with specific associated brain regions. Now, Glanzer and Kunitz aim to investigate 2 storage mechanisms, short-term and long-term memory, in a free recall experiment. To test this, all participants were presented lists of words one at a time and then asked to recall the words in any order. Half the participants were asked to recall the words immediately after memorizing them. In contrast, the other half had to count backwards for 30 seconds before recalling the words. Those who participated in immediate recall were better at remembering words near the start of the list, this is known as primacy effect, and near the end of the list, this is known as recency effect, than words in other positions. Those who recalled after distraction were also better at remembering words near the start of the list, but recall of words near the end of the list became similar to ones in the middle. This led to the conclusion that primacy effect occurs because the first words are best rehearsed and transferred to long-term memory, and recency effect occurs because the last words are still in short-term memory when participants begin recalling. Glanzer and Kunitz therefore demonstrates how short-term memory and long-term memory are 2 separate stores, and that, for information to be transferred from the former to the latter, maintenance rehearsal is required. Now, next is Sperling. Sperling aimed to look at the limited duration of the sensory store. To test this, participants were shown grids of digits and letters for 50 milliseconds, which is about the time equivalent to the blink of an eye. They were then either asked to write down all 12 items, or listen to a tone after the exposure and write down that row. The results showed that when participants were asked to report the whole thing, their recall was poorer. On average, only 4 items were recalled by participants asked to recall all 12 items. Comparatively, when participants were asked to give 1 row only, they were able to recall 3 items. This demonstrates that information decays rapidly in the sensory store, supporting the information processing model of memory, which proposes that the sensory store has a duration of 0.5 to 3 seconds. Further, Scoville and Milner conducted a case study on HM, a man who had a bilateral temporal lobectomy, during which his hippocampus was removed. After the procedure, HM developed anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories or store information in long-term memory. Now, Scoville and Milner aim to study the biological reasons behind HM's anterograde amnesia. To test this, Milner used many different strategies, including psychometric testing, interviews with HM and family members, and cognitive testing. The results showed that HM could not acquire new episodic or semantic knowledge. That is, he could no longer form long-term explicit memories. Alternatively, he had no problems with his procedural memory and still had a capacity for working memory. In other words, his short-term memory therefore remained completely functional. This led to the conclusion that the hippocampus is responsible for the transfer of short-term memory to long-term memory. This demonstrates that the brain has multiple memory storage systems that are supported by distinct brain regions and processes, as HM had deficits in long-term memory but not short-term memory. We will now look at an evaluation of all of these studies, as well as an overall evaluation of the theory. So, Glanzer and Kunitz was a lab experiment. Therefore, it established a cause and effect relationship between the independent variable, the type of recall, and the dependent variable, the position of words correctly recalled. A limitation, however, is that learning and recalling a list of words is an artificial task, meaning it may not reflect the complex nature of memory. The study, therefore, has low ecological validity. If the results don't reflect real life, then they don't provide valid evidence for the information processing memory model's claim that short-term memory and long-term memory are separate stores. In addition, spelling was also a laboratory experiment which had high controls, as each participant saw the same letters and heard the same sounds, which in this way decreases the effect of situational variables on the results and subsequently increases the reliability of the findings. However, the study also had low ecological validity, as the task of recalling random sets of letters is uncommon in everyday life and is unmotivating, therefore decreasing the generalizability of the results. In contrast, the study of HM by Scoville and Milner had high ecological validity, as they were exploring a natural phenomenon. It also produced detailed data, as it was a longitudinal specific study. However, a limitation is that it has limited representational generalizability, as it was a very specific and unique case with HM. Now, in terms of the model, the information processing model of memory as a whole, a positive is that it has generated a lot of research into memory and has high theoretical generalizability. Now, this can be seen with the large base of research that supports the idea of the model of these distinct short-term memory and long-term memory systems, such as Glanzer and Kunitz and HM. The model also has high theoretical generalizability, as it can account for primacy and recency effects, as also demonstrated in Glanzer and Kunitz. As well as this, the model provides good understanding of the structure and process of the short-term memory store, with Glanzer and Kunitz showing how old information is replaced with new information, with the last words on the list being interfered with by the distraction task. Now, some limitations of the theory is that it is arguably oversimplified, as evidence does suggest that there are multiple short and long-term memory stores. For example, Scoville and Milner demonstrated that there was episodic and semantic knowledge, procedural memory, and working memory. So memory is more complex than the information processing model of memory makes it out to be. As well as this, the theory itself is older as well as the studies, so it could be outdated and not temporarily relevant to this time. To conclude, the information processing model of memory is a justifiable theory, with Glanzer and Kunitz, Sperling, and HM all providing support for it. However, it is important to acknowledge that the model is oversimplified, with memory being such a complex cognitive process, so much of which is still unknown. Additionally, the low ecological validity of the lab experiments investigated today limits the extent to which the results can be said to support the information processing model of memory. Thank you for listening.